In a quiet neighborhood filled with friendly faces, there lived a homeowner named Mr. Thompson. He adored his garden, a colorful paradise bursting with blooming flowers and lush greenery. Every evening, he took great pride in walking through his yard, tending to the plants and enjoying the vibrant colors as the sun began to set. To make his garden even more magical at night, Mr. Thompson decided to install charming solar lights that twinkled like stars in the darkness. These lights not only highlighted the beautiful flowers but also made it easier for him to enjoy his evenings outdoors. Friends and neighbors often admired Mr. Thompson's garden, especially as it transformed into a glowing wonderland after sunset. He felt a sense of joy every time he walked outside and saw the soft glow illuminating his favorite plants. However, everything changed one fateful week when Mr. Thompson noticed that some of the solar lights had mysteriously vanished from his yard. He couldn't believe it. At first, he thought perhaps they had been blown away by the wind or taken by a curious animal. But as days went by and more lights disappeared, he began to feel uneasy, wondering what could be happening to his lovely nighttime display. Little did he know, the truth was lurking just around the corner. As the days passed, Mr. Thompson's confusion grew deeper with each missing solar light. One evening, he walked through his garden, noticing the empty spots where his beloved lights once stood. It felt like a puzzle that he couldn't solve, and the mystery began to gnaw at him. The twinkling ambience that used to fill his yard was fading away, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was up to no good. After mowing the lawn and watering his flowers, he would scan the area for any signs of the lights. Was it possible they had simply malfunctioned? But that didn't seem likely, considering how quickly they had all disappeared. Each night, as darkness enveloped his garden, Mr. Thompson felt a growing sense of unease. He could barely enjoy the peaceful evenings he once cherished. Determined to get to the bottom of the situation, Mr. Thompson started marking each light's placement with small stones so he could keep track of which ones had vanished. His friends and neighbors began to notice his agitation and offered suggestions, but none seemed to provide comfort. Instead of enjoying his garden oasis under the stars, Mr. Thompson found himself caught in a web of confusion and frustration, eager for answers about who, or what, was behind this curious disappearance. One evening, after yet another light had vanished, Mr. Thompson's frustration boiled over. Seated at his kitchen table, he stared out into the darkened yard, feeling helpless. Just then, it hit him, he had installed a security camera to keep an eye on his property. Maybe, just maybe, the footage could reveal what was happening to his beloved lights. With newfound determination, he made his way to the living room, where the computer sat waiting. As he clicked on the video files, anticipation stirred within him. Would it show a mischievous animal? Or perhaps a prankster taking advantage of the night? His heart raced as he scrolled through hours of footage. Finally, he landed on the segment from last night. With a deep breath, he pressed play and leaned in closer to the screen. The familiar sounds of chirping crickets filled the background, and soon enough, he saw movement near the edge of his yard. To his astonishment, it was Karen, a neighbor known for her quirky habits, sneaking around his garden in the darkness. Mr. Thompson watched in disbelief as she approached the solar lights, bending down to pick one up. His eyes widened as she muttered something about the lights being too bright. The revelation left him flabbergasted. Suddenly, everything made sense. As Mr. Thompson continued to watch the footage, he couldn't believe his eyes. There was Karen, the quirky neighbor known for her strong opinions on everything from lawn care to garden decorations, stealthily creeping into his yard under the cover of darkness. In the glow of the remaining solar lights, she looked almost comical, tiptoeing like a character out of a cartoon. Suddenly, she crouched down beside one of the lights, her hands reaching out as if she were plotting a grand heist. To his utter disbelief, she murmured to herself about how the lights were too bright, and that it was not fair for them to shine into her bedroom window. Mr. Thompson's jaw dropped. He had never realized she was bothered by the lights so much. With quick, careful movements, Karen grabbed one light and tucked it under her arm like a trophy. She seemed pleased with her haul, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. The absurdity of the situation struck Mr. Thompson hard. how could a bright light be confiscated for simply existing? He sat back in his chair, bewilderment mixing with a hint of amusement. Karen had turned his garden into her personal battleground against brightness. This newfound intel ignited a spark of determination within him. He needed to take action, this couldn't go on any longer. As Mr. Thompson sat back in his chair, he felt a mix of disbelief and annoyance bubbling within him. How could Karen, of all people, think she had the right to invade his yard and take his lights? He rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of her actions. Surely, she must have known how ridiculous this was. The whole situation felt like a scene from a silly comedy movie, and yet here he was, living it. He replayed the footage in his mind, Karen creeping around like a thief in the night and mumbling about brightness. The more he thought about it, the more absurd it seemed. Did she really believe taking his lights would fix her problem? It was maddening. Mr. Thompson thought about how many evenings he had spent tending to his garden, admiring the soft glow of those lights that brought joy not only to him but also to neighbors who passed by. Now they had become objects of Karen's personal grievance. He felt an urge to confront her and ask what she expected him to do, dim his garden for her comfort. The annoyance gradually transformed into determination, this couldn't continue. He had a right to enjoy his garden without worrying about someone else's whims. Mr. Thompson knew it was time to take a stand against this nighttime nonsense once and for all. As Mr. Thompson paced around his living room, a wave of inspiration washed over him. He couldn't just let Karen continue her nighttime heists. With a chuckle, he imagined various over-the-top ideas to deter her from snatching any more lights. What if he set up a motion-activated alarm that blared every time she approached the garden? The thought made him laugh out loud. He could picture Karen jumping in surprise while clutching a solar light. He grabbed a notepad and started jotting down his ideas. Perhaps he could rig up some fake lights that were actually glitter bombs. They'd explode in sparkles as soon as she touched them. Each idea became more ludicrous than the last. A tripwire that would douse her with water. Maybe even life-size cardboard cutouts of himself admonishing her for her antics. But then, as he considered practical options, Mr. Thompson thought about installing massive motion sensor LED floodlights instead. These wouldn't just illuminate his yard, they would turn it into an arena of light every time Karen walked by. She would have to rethink her late-night escapades if she was blasted with bright lights each time. In that moment, he felt a sense of glee at the thought of reclaiming his garden while simultaneously putting an end to Karen's shenanigans. This was going to be fun. With his plan set in motion, Mr. Thompson eagerly headed to the local hardware store the next day. He was determined to find the largest and most powerful motion sensor LED floodlights he could find. As he wandered through the aisles, he imagined how these massive lights would not only brighten up his garden but also put a stop to Karen's late-night escapades. After selecting a few floodlights that looked like they could light up the entire street, Mr. Thompson felt a rush of excitement. He pictured Karen trying to slip into his yard again, only to be greeted by a dazzling explosion of light as she accidentally triggered the sensors. It would be like turning on a stadium spotlight just for her. Once home, he set to work installing the floodlights around the perimeter of his front lawn. The process was more straightforward than he had anticipated, and soon enough, he had them perfectly positioned to cover every inch of his garden. After completing the installation, he stood back and admired his handiwork. The lights were enormous, like miniature suns waiting to spring to life. Finally, feeling satisfied with his efforts, Mr. Thompson couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of how this new setup would transform his garden into a beacon of brightness. He could hardly wait for nighttime to see how this would deter Karen once and for all. As night fell, Mr. Thompson stood by his window, excitement bubbling within him. The moment he had eagerly awaited had finally arrived. He watched as the first shadows of darkness enveloped the neighborhood, and soon enough, he would test his new motion sensor LED floodlights. Would they really illuminate his garden like a football field? Just then, the subtle rustling outside caught his attention. His heart raced as he peered outside, ready for action. Suddenly, the floodlights sprang to life. Brilliant beams of white light burst forth from all corners of the yard, casting away the darkness and flooding every inch with brightness. The effect was astonishing. Not only did it blank out shadows, but it also lit up parts of the neighboring yards as if a mini-sun had taken residence in his garden. The floodlights danced across the trees and flowers, illuminating previously hidden details in glorious detail. They provided a glowing spectacle that made Mr. Thompson grin with satisfaction. Anyone walking by couldn't help but notice this spectacular display. He couldn't contain his laughter as he imagined what Karen might think if she tried to sneak into his yard again tonight. She'd be startled by blinding rays of light illuminating her like a stage performer caught unawares. For the first time in days, Mr. Thompson felt at ease. His garden was transformed into a bright fortress against unwelcome intrusions. The next evening, as Mr. Thompson relaxed in his living room, he noticed movement outside. His heart raced with anticipation as he peered through the window. Sure enough, there was Karen, creeping down the sidewalk with her usual stealth, seemingly unaware of the bright transformation that awaited her. As she approached his yard, the motion sensors activated, and in an instant, the floodlights blared to life. A dazzling wall of light erupted around her, washing over the garden and illuminating every flower, bush, and corner of the lawn. The sudden brightness was so intense that it felt like midday had returned. Karen froze in her tracks, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. For a moment, she stood there, bathed in brilliant light, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Mr. Thompson couldn't help but stifle a laugh at the sight. Gone was her sneaky demeanor, now she looked utterly startled and slightly disoriented. She squinted at the brightness, trying to shield her eyes with her hands while glancing around as if assessing her surroundings for an escape route. The show of lights not only revealed her presence but also broadcasted it to anyone nearby. Unable to contain his amusement any longer, Mr. Thompson chuckled softly to himself, knowing this would surely give Karen pause before trying another confiscation. From his spot inside, he watched with satisfaction as she quickly turned on her heel and hurried away, defeated by his garden's new bright defense system. The following night, as Mr. Thompson settled in for a quiet evening, he was surprised by the sound of a loud knock at his door. He opened it to find Karen, her face flushed with frustration and fury. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, pointing an accusing finger toward his garden. "Those lights are blinding. I can't even sleep." Mr. Thompson sighed, knowing that her previous sneaky maneuvers had only escalated tensions. Instead of calming down, Karen seemed intent on making a scene. "You need to do something about those floodlights," she insisted, her voice growing louder and more insistent. When he calmly explained that the lights were there to protect his property, Karen's annoyance reached its peak. In a fit of anger, she pulled out her phone and declared she would call the police. "You're violating my rights with those lights," she exclaimed dramatically, as if the situation were much worse than it really was. Without hesitation, she dialed 911 and began to explain her side of the story to the operator, claiming Mr. Thompson's floodlights were causing her distress and invading her privacy. Mr. Thompson could hardly believe what he was witnessing. It felt like a scene from a sitcom gone wrong. As he waited for the police to arrive, he couldn't help but chuckle at how absurd this whole situation had become. Karen was escalating things further instead of realizing the humor in her failed attempts to confiscate his lights. A short while after Karen's phone call, Mr. Thompson heard the familiar sound of sirens approaching. He couldn't help but chuckle again, thinking about how ironic it was that she had escalated matters to this level. Moments later, 2 police officers arrived and stepped out of their car, looking around curiously. As they approached, Karen quickly swept in to greet them, her frustration clearly still boiling over. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she exclaimed, gesturing dramatically toward Mr. Thompson's house. "These floodlights are completely out of control. They're blinding me and invading my privacy." Mr. Thompson stood back, arms crossed, listening intently as Karen began to relay her side of the story. "I've tried to reason with him," she insisted, pointing a finger in his direction. "He keeps saying he has a right to his lights, but what about my right to peace and quiet? I can't even sleep at night. The officers exchanged glances as they listened to her complaints, trying to piece together the situation. Mr. Thompson interjected calmly, explaining that he installed the lights as protection for his property against her previous antics. As he spoke, he couldn't help but notice how Karen's frustration seemed to escalate with every word. While the officers took notes and considered the situation, Mr. Thompson knew this was a scene that no one would believe unless they saw it themselves, neighbors feuding over garden lights and calling the police. In that moment, he realized just how far Karen was willing to go to justify her actions. As the officers listened to Karen's complaints, they exchanged glances and tried to assess the situation. One officer, a calm and approachable woman named Officer Daniels, finally interjected, "Ma'am, while we understand your concerns about the lights, it's important to clarify a couple of things." She gestured toward Mr. Thompson's yard and continued, "First of all, these floodlights are on his property. He has the right to install whatever lights he wants as long as they're within his property lines. That includes making decisions to protect his home." Karen opened her mouth to respond but was cut off by Officer Daniels. "Secondly," she said firmly but kindly, "you have been trespassing by entering his yard without permission to take those lights. You cannot take items from someone else's property just because you find them bothersome." Mr. Thompson felt a sense of relief wash over him as Officer Daniels explained the situation clearly. He watched as Karen's expression shifted from frustration to disbelief. She was realizing how unreasonable her actions had been. The officers took a moment to write down their notes while explaining that if the problem continued, they would suggest mediation rather than escalation. Feeling slightly embarrassed and cornered, Karen muttered something under her breath about needing to rethink her approach before walking back toward her house, leaving Mr. Thompson feeling vindicated in this strange dispute over garden lights. In the days that followed, the tension in the neighborhood began to settle. Karen, still reeling from her encounter with the police, received a citation for trespassing due to her previous antics. It served as a wake-up call for her, reminding her that actions have consequences, even over something as seemingly trivial as garden lights. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson enjoyed a newfound peace in his vibrant yard. The massive floodlights continued to bathe his garden in warm, welcoming light each night, transforming it into a picturesque retreat. He often found himself sitting outside, relishing the beautiful evenings without the worry of Karen's nighttime visits. The bright glow not only showcased his beloved plants but also became a symbol of triumph in a battle he never expected to fight. Neighbors began to take notice of the splendid spectacle and often stopped by to admire the garden's transformation. Mr. Thompson welcomed them with open arms, sharing stories about the absurdity of the situation with Karen. Laughter echoed through the yard as he recounted her attempts to confiscate his lights. Feeling victorious and amused, Mr. Thompson knew he had taken a stand for his right to enjoy his property. With each passing day, he was reminded of how quickly things could change, and how sometimes, even a quirky neighborhood dispute could lead to unexpected joy and camaraderie among neighbors. As the days rolled on, the neighborhood buzzed with chatter about the quirky events surrounding Karen and Mr. Thompson. Neighbors gathered in their yards, sharing stories of their own encounters with Karen's antics, each tale more ridiculous than the last. Mrs. Jenkins from 3 doors down recounted how she once found Karen trying to reorganize her garden gnomes because she believed they were aligned too close to her property line. Another neighbor, Mr. Smith, chimed in with a laugh about how Karen had called him twice to complain that his wind chimes were way too loud for her to tolerate, only for him to find her standing in his yard plotting to take them down. The camaraderie built through these shared experiences fostered a sense of community. One evening, as the sun began to set and the floodlights illuminated Mr. Thompson's garden like a stage spotlight, he hosted a small gathering for everyone. With laughter and warmth filling the air, they jokingly drafted up a Karen incident report form for anyone who had interactions with her, a humorous way to remember their unusual neighbor. As his friends laughed over drinks and stories in his brilliantly lit yard, Mr. Thompson realized that sometimes even the most frustrating situations could bring people together. With smiles all around, he knew that his garden lights had not only protected his property but had also lit the way for new friendships forged over whimsical tales of neighborhood antics.